Okay, so I wanted to spend our time today really focusing on the process of generating UV maps, okay, and of course texturing our blacksmith shop. Hopefully, if you've been working and playing along with us over the last week, you should be at a point where you can easily start inserting these tiling textures into your model, okay? We're going to be spending almost all of our time today on the texturing phase of your blacksmith shop. Now, with a complex object like you see on the screen here, the approach that we need to take to successfully create the diffuse texture maps is very, very different, okay? Let me just jump over into the UV editing workspace, and I think how I've laid out my UVs is a perfect illustration of the challenge that we have in front of us, okay? Let me select my UV maps here, and boom, there they are, okay? That right there is very different from what we're used to working with, right? If you think back to a lot of the smaller props that we've been constructing, everything has been placed where inside of our UV grid? Yeah, in that positive UV quadrant, right? The upper right-hand quadrant inside of the grid. Now, I mean, my UVs are all over the place, and you're probably saying, wow, Pat has no idea what he's doing, and he's been lying to us over the last couple weeks. No, I haven't. Our technique and our approach changes dramatically when we start texturing large objects, okay? This has everything to do with quality. Everything to do with quality, okay? If you think about it, the number of UV islands, independent, discrete, separate UV islands on an object like my little building here is far, far greater than what we had on like the crate, for example, or the wine barrel, or the smaller objects that we've been constructing thus far, right? On the crate, maybe you had 6 or 7, different UV islands. I probably have a couple hundred, because every single polygon on my building needs to be UV'd, right? Geometrically, we're increasing the detail of our meshes, and we're also increasing the number of UV islands as well. So our approach fundamentally needs to change. In the past, if you go back to some of the other projects this semester, we focused exclusively on using the texture as the driving. The texture really is the driver. It's the one thing that determines the surface characteristics of our models. Well, in the game art pipeline, especially when we're working with buildings, it's really all about the material. The material is going to filter our image. We're not going to have one texture map like we did with some other projects, right? We're not going to have one diffuse texture like we did for our shop sign or the crate or the wine barrel. We're probably realistically going to have 5 or 6 different images that describe this object, different images. This also allows us to create a system where we can recycle textures across the entire game. We're no longer localizing a texture to just one model. We're open sourcing it, if you will. We're allowing one texture, one tiling texture, to be used on a number of different objects inside of our game environment. So that's and the quality of our textures is going to go up quite dramatically as well. If you think back to the process of packing all of our UVs in that positive UV quadrant, you can pretty quickly guess that the smaller UV islands are going to have very, very low texture quality associated with them, right? Because the number of pixels that we have to describe a detail on a smaller UV island is only going to be a few, right? In comparison to the larger UV islands, which are going to have more pixels associated with them. They're going to have an increase in quality. So we have to be concerned about quality here. We want to have a uniform level of quality across all the surfaces of this object. That tiling texture workflow is definitely going to give me the best results, okay? Now you can see here that I have just very quickly thrown in a whole bunch of UVs into my into my UV workspace. This is often how I work. It really is, as odd as it sounds. This is a great quick way for me to start getting some UVs in. Now I'm going to use a combination of the OpenGL viewport here and my UV workspace to help me get through the UVing stage. If you remember back to an earlier conversation that we had in the semester, overlapping UVs are not necessarily a bad thing, and in this tiling texture workflow, it's not a bad thing at all, right? We can have our UVs overlapping because the material that's associated with each one of these polygons is really going to determine how this tiling texture shows up on our model. So I'm nowhere near being done here, but I am at a point where I need to start evaluating the textile density, their size and relationship of size to each one of our UV islands, okay? So let's start doing it here. You can see that, let's do this. I'm going to open up my preset browser. And inside of the images UV section, let's just throw this bad boy at the top of my shader tree. Now, and since it's outside of any material group, this image is going to show up on all polygons inside of my scene, which is a great quick way to just blast a checker pattern on top of everything. And you can begin to see that we have some wholesale issues across the entire UV setup for this object. Now, on the surface here, what are those wholesale issues? What are some of the big problems that I'm going to be working against with the current state of my UVs?
Everything's a different size.
Yeah, if you look very closely at the size of all of our checkers, they're very, very different in size. The roof, the checker pattern is really big. On some of the detail pieces, the checker pattern is very small. So we have some big time issues in here that we need to get over, okay? Inside the tiling texture workflow, it is critical, and I mean absolutely critical, that all of our UV islands be scaled and the relationship and scale to each other needs to be established, okay? We want all of the grid squares on this image to be the exact same size, okay? So let's do it real fast. And there's some great tools inside of our workflow that will help us very, very quickly get to that size and that relationship. As you can see, I'm not quite done here. There's still some pieces that I need to figure out. But as a whole, I'm marching closer and closer and closer to where I need to be. Let's do the roof. And this is where having the selection system inside of our OpenGL viewport is so important. Okay. All right, so there's my roof. Here's all my UVs for my roof. Okay, looking pretty great. Now, what can you tell me? And again, let's just look at the way the UVs are laid out here. What can you tell me? Oops, I got a little issue in here. What is that red line? Let's figure out what that is. Okay, so it's part of that guy. Oops. All right. So I have some big time problems in here with my UVs, okay? Let's project ourselves into the tiling texture workflow ever so slightly. I'm going to be putting a tiling texture of maybe some roof tiles on this thing, okay? Shoot, let's just go find some tiling textures. There's no reason you can't start infusing these tiling textures into your process now. There really isn't. You can start making the workflow. I think that's actually a great idea because then we can size our UVs to match the size of our tiling textures. That's really cool, okay? Let's just do it real fast. Why not, okay? We're going to have to flip one of them too, right? Because if you look at the way the texture is being laid down, on this side, I want all the numbers to be as is, kind of upright. But on this side, I also want all the letters and numbers to be upright as well. Having them conjoined in the middle here is producing some big times problems for us. So I need to separate them out, scale them to each other, and make sure they're packed inside of my UV environment the way I need them to be. Let's just do it real fast. And probably for the roof itself, it's most easily seen, or this concept is most easily seen when we have a tiling texture in there. So here's a great resource, back to textures.com. We've been here before, right? Textures.com, it's a pretty fantastic. I have some roofing tiles that I have already kind of downloaded and selected on this machine. So this is the one that I'm going to use for this example, okay? You can use any roofing tile, which is fine. I think I may go grab some other roofing tiles here in a minute, but this is a good one to start with, kind of this cool slate one. I have that one already saved to my machine. However, I think I just remembered that I buried it in a folder. Let me expose all that stuff. Yep, there it is. Just put it on my desktop for the time being. All right. Now, let's import, and I already have a material group for my chimney, or excuse me, from my roof established. Let's import that image map and look at exactly how the computer is going to be working with this image. Okay. Bum, 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 and there's my big time problem, right? On this side of my roof, life is good, albeit the roofing tiles are gigantic. But on this side, all the roofing tiles are going the wrong way, okay? We now have to be very mindful of where and how all of our UV islands are laid out inside of our UV workspace, because their placement is going to have a direct effect on how the tiling texture system is going to work, okay? So we need to make some edits in here. we have two big things that we need to change. Clearly, we need to get the orientation of our UVs kind of dialed, right? This side is good. This side, not so good, though. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to break all this off. And this is a great trick. I love this trick, okay? Right now, they're all connected to each other. If you fire off the Move tool, check it out. There's a fantastic option over here called Tear Off. And this is physically going to unweld the UVs from each other, which is pretty neat. So we'll tear off the selected UVs from its friend. Bloop. Awesome. Now, often what I do whenever I turn Tear Off on is that after I'm done tearing off that section of my UVs, I immediately turn it back off, okay? That's a persistent option inside of the Move tool, and you're going to forget that it's on, and then you're going to accidentally in the future start unhooking things. You're like, oh, I didn't mean to do that, right? Just turn it off when you're done. Okay, now with that unhooked, we can just rotate it around 180 degrees, and we're good to go. Yep, awesome. Awesome. Now, so problem number 1, finished. What's problem number 2 in here? You got it. Yeah, the size of the roof tiles on the actual polygons are just way too big. The UVs and the material are now the driver of how these polygons on our mesh are going to look. We're no longer relying on the texture to determine how it's going to look. The UVs and the material are now the active player in this process. So how can I make the tiles, the roof, the actual image itself, tile smaller so we get a more realistic reflection of what we're after? There's 2 ways of going about doing this. Yes?
One is physically increasing the size of the UV tiles, but the other is horizontal vertical wrap.
You got it. So those are the 2 ways of getting this where we want to go. Side of that positive UV quadrant. Since the texture is going to repeat basically infinitely, horizontally and vertically bigger to get the proper size and scale reproduction that we're after on the actual image map itself. Does that make sense? So we're absolutely allowed to make our UVs bigger and extend past the borders of the positive UV quadrant. That's cool, okay? The other way of doing this, and I want to hit undo. There we go. The other way of doing this is to go into the actual material itself, go into the actual image map itself, and adjust the texture locator. So here's the tiling texture. Here's the texture locator for it. And check it out, the horizontal and vertical wrap. This is basically determining how many times this image is stamped down inside of one positive UV quadrant, okay? Increasing this number is going to increase the number of times that this image is placed inside of the UVs, okay? Giving us the exact same result that we had when we scaled our UV islands up a minute ago. Great trick. Clearly, you're probably going to want the horizontal and vertical wrap to be identical. So if you hit the little 0 over here, it's going to link those 2 values. And now I can use my double arrows as a slider and kind of dial it in pretty quickly as well. I try to keep them to whole numbers just to make the math easier. You can see that life is good. I'm pretty pleased with the direction that this texture set is going. Okay. These are 2 different ways of getting the exact same result. One is not necessarily better than the other and through the lens of quality, but I think there is a hitch in here that we have to keep in mind. When we're exporting our model, a number of the details associated with the texture locator are not going to get exported. In all honesty, the texture locator isn't exported at all, right? It's a Modo-specific item. When we bring this model over into Unity here in a second, you're going to see that we have some direct issues surrounding the reproduction of this model in Unity. That horizontal and vertical wrap value isn't included in the exported material, okay? Because it's not part of the material. The only thing that Modo is going to export is the material, not the texture that's associated with the material. So oftentimes, well, not often, every time, that horizontal and vertical wrap value is not going to get exported. You can still use this over inside of Unity, and you'll see this in a minute when we get this thing out of Modo and back into Unity, but you're going to have to kind of manually recreate that horizontal and vertical wrap texture tiling number. You'll see it easily inside of the system in Unity, but if you don't remember that you changed your horizontal and vertical wrap, Unity is not going to assume that you did. Okay, so it's one extra thing to manage. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, increasing and decreasing the size of the UVs in your UV workspace is how I do it, because there's nothing for me to remember when I export this model from the application, right? What I see in the OpenGL viewport here in Modo is a direct representation of what I'm going to get when I import this thing over into Unity. I don't have to remember, oh, I changed the horizontal and vertical wrap values for this. I need to change that in my material setup in Unity. Okay. We'll leave the roof tile one as is, and I'm going to, just so we can illustrate that idea here in a minute. Now, as a reminder, what you see inside the OpenGL viewport is what you get. I actually have two different roofs that are going to get the exact, I think I have like three, excuse me. Yeah, this one should get this X. Yeah, I have a whole bunch here. Let's grab all of these guys. Yep, okay. Shift H to hide. This one apparently didn't get, oh, I haven't UV'd that one. Haven't UV'd that one, so we'll just hide that one too. We'll do it later. Now, you can also start to see the importance of understanding the relationship in scale of our UVs to each other, right? All 1, 2, 3, 4 roof lines are sharing the exact same material, which is what we want, right? The material is now the driver of the placement of textures on our polygons, okay? So we have some work in front of us. We have some work in front of us to ensure that we're getting the result that we want. Let me show you specifically what I'm talking about here. Now, I'm pretty happy with the size of my roofing tiles on that part of my model. That looks pretty good. But on this one, it's using the exact same material, and what do I need to do? You got it. You got it. I need to increase the size of the UVs to ensure that I'm getting what I need to get, right? Or, I'm sorry, I need to decrease it in this particular situation. Now, at the moment, because they're all spread out over our positive UV quadrant, it's kind of difficult and it's very manual. This process is very manual at the moment. I'm going to suggest we do this. Let's experiment with the pack UV command, because it's going to look at the size of each one of these UV islands and try to pack them in a way that they maintain their spatial and size relationships to each other. Okay? Let's see if the computer can help me out in this. And I want to just go back in time. There we go. Now, that bottom roof tile, or that bottom roof is tiled incorrectly. So we'll be able to, I think, a little bit more visibly see the impact of this next step. Let's do pack UVs. There it is. Okay. We'll leave all of these values at where they are, just for the time being, and hit OK. Aha. Wonderful. Now, if you look at the size of the texture on each one of these guys, they're the same. The pack UV command has done a great job of analyzing the size of all of the polygons, packing them inside the positive quadrant, and maintaining their textile density relationship. Does that make sense? It's a great, great option. This is one of the things that they spent a lot of energy on in the most recent version of Modo. Okay. However, little problem though. It kind of looks like a fish now, right? Because the orientation of our UVs inside of our UV workspace is wrong, okay? So what are we to do? Well, let's do this. Let's go back in time for a step here. Just hit undo a couple times. We'll run pack UV again, so maybe this time we don't orient them. Bloop. Yeah. Yeah, so these two roof guys here, they were already wrong, by the way. So it's, let me fix those real quick. Just rotate them 90 degrees. Aha, wonderful. So that one looks right. But that size isn't right. Let's fix it real fast. Just using that tear off command once more. Oops.
Did it automatically snap while you were rotating it? Or did you...
If you hold down the control key before you click, it'll snap to 15-degree increments. Yeah, that's a good one. Snapping to 15-degree increments. Do the same thing. FYI, the tear off command also shows up in the rotation tool, so kind of saves you a step. Bloop. There we go. That's looking good. That side's looking good. Yelp. Yelp.
So would you want to leave them separated, or would you stick them back together?
I'm going to leave them separated. Yeah, I'm going to leave them separated. Luckily for me, I'm putting that in finger quotes there, okay, the seam for each of these is right here at the top. Our gamer's never going to see it, okay? And that actually comes to the next step. So we'll come back to where we can maybe massage our textures a little bit to get a more realistic result. We'll come back to that idea in a second, because what I don't want to have are all these little scallops here. That's kind of breaking the illusion to a certain degree, right?
But you could cover that up in texturing too, couldn't you?
No.
Just getting rid of it?
Yeah, you really can't in the tiling texture workflow. Well, you can, but you can't, okay? Because remember, we're using one tiling texture
Oh, yeah.
on all of them, okay? All of those polygons are getting influenced by the same texture. So if we were to try to go in and paint out that detail, we're going to see that painted out detail on every single one of them in the wrong spot too, okay? Let's do the pack UV command once more. We'll turn off orient. Bloop. There they go. And let's see what we got here. Just doing a quick inspection. Yeah, I think we're darn near close. Sometimes it's hard to gauge in between. But I think we're close. I think we're close, okay? Now the illusion here isn't great, right? Especially when we turn on the rest of the model, because we look underneath, and what do we have? Yeah, we have tiles, right? We shouldn't see roofing tiles on the underside of our roofs, on the inside of my little house here. So this kind of further illustrates the importance and the role of tiling textures. We're going to go find a new texture to place on the underside of my roof, okay? And maybe we'll even do an additional one for the border polygon to make it look like there's a wood beam there. We probably should only be seeing the roofing tiles on the topmost polygons, right? So let's go ahead and start that process. The low-hanging fruit in this particular situation are these guys in here. So we'll do these guys real fast, the underside. And I'm going to assign them to a new material. There we go. So we'll just call these new material. We'll call this roof, not rud, roof bottom. There we go. Okay. And now let's go back to textures.com and find something here that will match where we're going. And roofing is happen to have a category of inside. Thank you, textures.com. And now we get to have some fun here. And I think I'm just going to choose this one. One of the great things that I've noticed about this version of textures.com is that we now have an option in the upper right-hand corner to only display the tiling or seamless textures inside the viewer. So I'm going to do that. So now all of these are tiling textures. And I think I'm just simply going to grab maybe this one. Yeah, here's the tiling one. Let's just download it real fast. There we go. We'll put it in. There it is. Okay, now let's go back to my roofs here. Shift H. Let's take a look at what's going on this side of my model. Oops, looks like I forgot to grab. There we go. That one got roof bottom too. Now we're good to go. Okay, so we have some big time issues in here, do we not? Yeah. So because that is not a compelling illusion. So what are my options? What am I going to go in here and do? I have two different things that I can do. And how do we do that?
With the vertical and horizontal wrap.
You got it, with the horizontal and vertical wrap. That's a good solution. I'm free, if I wanted to disconnect the UVs in this area. I could do that if I wanted to, but I don't think I'm going to because I like their connection and their relationship to the rest of the roofing pieces. So I think in this particular situation, changing the horizontal and vertical wrap values underneath my texture locator is probably the direction I want to go. Let's link them. We'll increase their size. You can see where we're going here. Let's put this at 7, and I'm on my way. Okay. However, we have another issue in here that's going to be influencing our decision-making process. If you look very, very carefully, what's my big-time issue? And let's just focus our attention on this top roof, on this one. What's my problem on the inside? They don't line up, right? And they don't look very real, okay? So I think I'm actually going to have to go in those polygons from the rest of the network to get what I'm after. Let's tear them off. Because I want to be able to control these independently from the rest, okay? Because I want to be able, let's take that one. Take this guy. Check this out. Okay, I'm going to, but I think it's an important feature to disable at this stage of our production pipeline, okay? I need to make a change in location to the selected UVs to get the proper placement of the texture on my polygons over there on the right. The selection color is getting in. Simply put, I just can't see what I'm doing over in the OpenGL viewport because of that orange selection color. You can turn that off. And this is why it's called Pandora's box, or this is why we're opening Pandora's box in this moment, because if you're not aware that it's off, this will drive you mad, okay? Because you're like, why am I? Yeah. You're just turning it off or on. Yeah. You still get a rollover color, okay? But notice that I have those selected here, but it's not selected over in the OpenGL viewport, okay? Now, with that off, I can start moving things around and getting the result that I'm after, which is maybe something like that, okay? If you move it up and down in this space, you can also change maybe where that board goes. That's probably the result that I want. So now we're almost kind of designing our texture set in the OpenGL viewport. Check this action out. The closer you zoom in, the finer, kind of tuned movements you can make. Now, given where I am in this textures tiling, it may be impossible for me to line all these up. Let's just try. Oh, we're getting closer, I think. I always try to see if I can line them up. Sometimes we're just going to, that's close enough for me. I'm not going to spend too much more energy trying to line up those boards and those beams, but we're getting a much more compelling result than we were earlier, okay? And that's starting to look pretty good, okay? Let's unhide the rest. Yeah, not so bad. Not so bad. Of course, you're going to want to do this to the scale of the object itself. Sometimes you get lucky. Okay, something like that. Yeah, now I've created just with the texture itself, the small illusion of a ridge line, and moving the UV left to right may help kind of solidify that, that illusion. Yeah, I'm happy with that. That's actually really good, okay? We're creating the illusion that there's a framed structure underneath that ridgeline. We'll see a little bit of it, and I think that pays off in spades for me, okay? Now, what do we lose in this process? We get that still. We can still do bump maps. As long as the bump maps are derived directly from the tiling textures that we're using, life is good. What are we losing in this process? the ability to localize texture detail, right? I can't go paint in like really cool drips. I can't go add local custom texture information on the ridge lines. We're kind of spray painting and flooding entire areas with a pattern, if you will. We will be talking about techniques, I think next week or the week after, I can't remember on the schedule, of how we can, in fact, go in and localize texture detail and add, like, you know, add a new layer, if you will, of tiling textures or textures on top of what we have already. So that process is available to us, but we're going to kind of baby step into this world, okay? Now, if you look very closely at the quality of the textures that I've created here, things are looking pretty fantastic, actually. I'm quite pleased with what I have here. There's a uniform quality over across the entire model. So this is exactly, precisely what I'm after. Now, let's do one more here. I want maybe all of these guys, and this is where having show selections on is really kind of nice. Let's grab all of these guys. All the outside border pieces, and let's see if we can throw them into their own material so that we can start describing what this what those border pieces look like. Because the illusion breaks down pretty quickly when you have the roofing tile pattern wrap over the edge like a birthday present over in here. The illusion kind of breaks, right? Because that's not what it's going to look like. Ends. Okay. There it is. Let's go to textures.com and find a texture that we can use for that process. Under wood, let's do this. This is going to be the wrong type. It's probably going to be under rough. Let's do that one. Seamless. Yeah, and maybe we just use this pattern right here, or even this one. Let's preview what that looks like. Okay, that's not great. I'm not going to use that one. And the reason I'm not going to use that one is that they have some very, very localized details in the texture that are really easy to spot when it tiles, right? Yeah, you can see, and that's kind of one of the challenges working in this tiling texture process, right? You won't ever see a seam, right? But the pattern can be noticeable from a distance, right? So I think I'm going to go and find, maybe use this one. I've used this one a lot. It's actually a really nice one. Let's download that texture, and we'll be on our way. Okay, let's load that one in. Add layer, image map, load image. Wood rough. Boop. There it is. Okay, so it's in there, right? It's in there. I want to go into my material selection mode. This really helps in this process, especially when you have a bunch, and I mean a bunch of polygons. There they all are. Now, what is my big time dealio here? Size, right? Can you see the wood grain in there? Nope, right? Let's increase the size of my UVs just globally here real fast. So at the very least, we get the smallest illusion, if you will, of that wood grain pattern. Now let's focus our energy on the front ones here, these guys. Over here, it's rocking, right? That's exactly the way we want it to look. Cool, right? Because we're getting some cool wood grain. But these in here, problematic, right? Let's tear them off. What's the resolution to my problem here? You got to rotate them. You got them. Okay. Let's just rotate them each 90 degrees, and you can see instantly here that we fixed our problem, and we're starting to create the illusion that we're after. We see that wood grain pattern in there. I think that one, or maybe they still may be just a little too small, a little bit too big. Excuse me. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Sorry. Awesome. That's cool. So with tiling textures, or excuse me, with wood grain, you're almost always going to have to go in and rotate the boards to match the wood grain direction, right? We have to be mindful of that direction. So it takes a couple seconds, but it's not too bad. Here's a cool thing. Change your action center to local, and then when you rotate them, they all kind of rotate in spot. It's kind of neat. It's an oldie but a goodie. Now this one over here, it's kind of hard to tell. And actually, if you look at the texture as a whole, it's kind of difficult to tell. Whoops. Let's just tear that one off. Turn off my action center. There we go. There we go. Now, one of the challenges that we have right now is that, man, it's not reading like wood grain, right? You know it's a wood grain pattern, but is our audience going to interpret that as wood grain? Probably not, right? So we need to do some changes to the actual texture itself to ensure that what we're producing in our OpenGL viewport will be interpreted correctly by our gamer. One of the great things about working inside of Modo is that what you see in this viewport is very, very similar to what you're going to see over in your game world, okay? Kind of what you see is what you get. So if it's confusing here, it's absolutely going to be confusing over in Unity. Herein lies probably another grand benefit of working inside of the tiling texture workflow. I can take the texture, open it in Photoshop, make a change to the raw texture, and then any polygon that's associated with that material group is going to naturally get that update as well. So we can make sweeping, model-wide changes quickly by changing how our texture is being displayed inside of, in our case, inside of Photoshop. And I think I'm just going to do maybe some a levels call to make it more contrasty, to make the blacks a little bit blacker, make the highlights in the texture a little bit more, a little higher value. And then I might increase the saturation a little bit to make it more brown. Come on, Photoshop, open up. Here we go. Please open. Here we go. Great. So I can't change the size of it, and I don't really want to change the details, but I can maybe do a levels call. I love doing levels calls. I think probably what we need to do, something like that. Well, that's pretty good. Command U is going to allow you to do hue saturation. I'm just going to increase the saturation, a little too much, I think. Maybe just a little bit to make it more brown. That's kind of what I'm after. Okay, and then I'm just going to File Save and overwrite the JPEG that's currently in my system. Because when I pop back into Modo, it says, hey, an update. Boop, getting better. Getting better. Also, let's just run over into the render environment here. This is an old project file, so it doesn't have the sRGB LUT, but that's better. That's better. Okay. All right, let's unhide the rest of my model. Yeah, now we're marching a little bit closer to what the end result could look like. I still think we have some texture work that needs to be done, but this illustrates how fast and how easy it can be if you keep going through this process, right? Let's chat real fast about maybe the wood beams. Okay, I have a material group already created here for the wood beams. And I think I'm going to recycle the image that I'm using for all of for these guys in here. Okay, so let's do it. Add layer, image map. I'm not going to load an image. I'm going to use the clip browser and choose that one right there. And you can see that because I've UV'd everything already, life is good. It just pops right in, and I'm ready to go. Now, pay real close attention to the wood grain in all of this, okay? This is the part that kind of breaks the reality of our model, because our wood grain is going to be going in rather odd directions. It's not too difficult to go in and to rotate these so the wood grain pattern flows in the correct orientation. I can already see that I made a mistake there. Yeah, both that one and that one need to be changed. Change my action center to local, fire off my rotation tools. Oops, it looks like, oh, I just needed to change the top one. There we go, wonderful. I probably should scale all of them down. Yeah, because if you look closely here, well, it's a judgment call, it really is. The wood grain pattern on these two are very, very different than what's on top and bottom, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just something to note, okay? So go through your model with a fine-tooth comb. Sometimes you miss things, like I've missed it there. Rotate it 90 degrees, get the pattern going the right way. It really does pay off in spades. All right, let's do the walls, because I got some fun things planned for the walls. Turn show selections back on, and we'll do that one and maybe that one. Shift H, there's all the UVs. Now let's go back into textures.com and find maybe under the plaster section, plaster. I did plastic, I wanted plaster, excuse me. I was like, fiberglass, that's not plaster. Let's see, there's some good ones. Let's go into dirty. I only want the tiling ones. Ooh, yeah, this is some fun stuff in here. Let's do this one. I think this is probably going to be the best one. Let's just see what it looks like. So the great thing about tiling textures is that you can experiment, right? There is no point of no return like there is in the Photoshop-centric model of texturing, right? You're free to make changes and swap things out pretty quickly to create the illusions that you have in front of us. This is exactly what most modern game engines are going to be using. The material is really the driver of how something looks in the game, not necessarily the Photoshop texture that's associated with it. All right. So I believe I have yep, got all those. Those are all tagged with this walls material group. And now let's load in that texture that I just downloaded from textures.com and see how it all looks. Okay. So it's looking okay. I think I'm going to do the exact same thing that I did with this other one. Excuse me for one moment. This is called leveling the texture. Command L. It's really taking advantage of the entire dynamic range. Just making the darks a little bit darker here, the whites a little bit whiter. Just make it pop a little bit more. Now I have a big time problem here that I'm going to have to manage, right? Look at this tiling texture. There's like a metal kind of tin or lead lined roof right there. That's going to be a problem for me. So let's see how we can mitigate that problem and sidestep it. Awesome. Now I can see the texture a little bit more easily. All right. Now, is that a problem for me at the moment? It is. Yeah, there it is down here. Here's the big time problem. Oops, let's do this. I'm actually going to grab these three, do Shift H. Let's pack them in so they're all the same size. And now I'll go through and make them all bigger as a whole, right? Because their size, oops, they're on local. Let's just change that to none. Now what I'm looking at here is the size of the texture detail as it's showing up on the model. That's a good size. Now I have the pleasure of going in and moving each one of these walls around to get what I'm after. So that one, check it out. So this is where we are here. I'm gonna start moving these, oops, not the actual polygons, the UVs, to move them up and down to see if I can get rid of that lead line, okay? I also need to make some decisions here as to, does that line represent the floor or the ceiling? What do you guys think? Should that be the floor or the ceiling? Probably should be the ceiling. Yeah. So I'll move all of my UVs just down a little bit until I can no longer see. There we go. Cool. I just had an idea. If you look at what I have over here, you can kind of see it's the position of the UV in the in relationship to the texture. It's giving me this lovely kind of weathering pattern down here at the bottom. I think I want to have that for all of them, since this kind of roughly matches the bottom. That's cool. There we go. Awesome. Yeah, I like that because now there's a change in color as it goes to the ground, right? It kind of looks like, because I put like the heaviest weathered area of the texture at the bottom of the house, it looks like, you know, it's sitting on the ground. Like that area has been influenced more by its environment than the part that's right up against next to the wood beams. Okay, that's kind of cool. So I would naturally go through and do the exact same thing. Let's just do it for these because I can't not do it. It's just going to drive me crazy. Same idea, though. Coolio. Challenge on this one, right? What to do, what to do. Do you guys see the challenge here? Yeah, no matter where I put it, I want to have that unfortunate, you know, that unfortunate ceiling. So what am I going to do? Yeah, I think that's what I'm going to do. However, since all three of these walls have already been scaled to each other, you want to make sure you scale them as a unit. And sometimes big movements in the scale parameter gives you the effect that you want. I need to do it a little bit more. Scale it down. There we go. Yes, wonderful. And that's it. We're getting there. We're getting there. However, I don't know if that plaster idea is really appropriate for up top there, but I think you get the idea that we're going for, right? Oh, wait, forgot about these guys. Let's fix those real fast. Cool. The last thing that I want to talk about before we kind of jump over in Unity and look at how we can hook all this stuff up together is the chimney itself, because the chimney actually presents a little bit of a challenge for us. We have to make a big time decision here on how I want my chimney to look. I think in my mind here, maybe this is going to be some sort of like rock, like cobblestone pattern. Oh, this is definitely the wrong category. Maybe it's let's see, what category should we use here? Let's see, how about, I think it's under floors. Yeah, this is where I was going. So it's actually a floor pattern. No, actually, this is not right. I've seen different ones. It's like paving. Is that a category? No. What? Let's check out roads. Where we're going, we don't need roads. No, fortunately not. Maybe under damage. Let's see what it looks like. Nope. It's in here somewhere. Nature. It's like a cool cobblestone. Actually, let's search for cobblestone. Uh-huh. Well, not exactly what I was after, but shoot, let's just go with this one for the time being. It's not exactly what my mind had imagined, but it will work. Do they have an Italian version of it? Oh no. Of course they. Yeah, absolutely.
I'll make one for you and get it back so you can pay me.
Let's try rounded bricks. Maybe it's in here. There we go. That'll work. This'll do. Let's pick this one. It's got such a lovely color in it. And it's got an Italian one. That'll do. Let's load it in. I believe I already have the chimney one selected. I do. Let's add layer, image map, load image. Get that chimney guy in here. Okay, so big time issues. Let's just pack these and see where we're going here. All right, actually not too bad. It did a really great job of packing. And the problem that we have here is that we have a very large structure, and then we have this detail piece on the inside. And that's something we want to manage. We have to make a decision as to how big we want this little pattern to show up on both of these UV islands. It makes sense for me that the majority of my chimney, since it's a big structure, it'd be big rocks, right? But down here, down here on the shelf, if you will, the opening for the chimney, maybe they're not big. Maybe the rocks are a little bit smaller. So put yourself in the shoes of the artisan that would be making something like this, and we can easily customize the visuals of each one of our objects just by exploring around with the different sizes of our UVs. And clearly I didn't do this section, but I think you guys get the idea. Look what we have. Ha. Pretty cool. And within a couple seconds here, I've been able to very quickly flesh out all the, basically what my object is going to look like over in the game engine. Okay? Pretty cool, huh? Very cool. Tiling textures are awesome, because now we get to paint and flood entire areas of our model with a single texture that's going to repeat over and over and over and over again. If we're careful, if we select good textures that have a lot of character, a lot of detail in it, our models will reflect that level of detail. Okay, now we're not done yet. There's still a couple things in here that we need to do. Let's just make sure that we go in, clean up our scene here, because I'm ready to export all this out. Don't need this, the shadow catcher. And I'm also going to get rid of the base material, just to make sure that doesn't go for the ride as well.
So we can create these textures, like I can create in Substance, right?
I'm sorry, can you say it again?
Would I be able to create this in Substance and
Substance is a completely different beast, right? Because if you're doing all your texture work in Substance, well, what's common between the two workflows is the role of the material, right? Because in Modo, when you export your model out to start working in Substance, the material tag is going to come with the model itself. It's a great way for us to tell Substance specifically which polygons are going to be influenced by which part of our Substance network. So that's the common part in this process.
would it go to you for the homework or create like a tiling texture in Substance and export it like a bitmap or something?
It's fine, yeah, absolutely. How you get those tiling textures is entirely up to you. I think, I've said this many times, if there's two apps that I would add to our program, if I had all the money in the world and $1 million to give you guys and for gear and hardware and software, I'd teach ZBrush and I'd teach Substance Designer, because I think those two applications are going to have matured into a major player in the game art pipeline. Yeah, especially Substance for the texturing category. It's turned into the place to go, in my opinion. Yeah, so if you're really interested in being a game artist, learn Substance Designer from Algorithmic. It's a great app.
And the payment model is really
yeah, Yeah.
And then once you pay the equivalent total, once the total of your payments is equivalent to what it would be if you had purchased it up front,
You're
you
done.
don't have to pay anymore.
Yeah, you're done. It's yours at that point.
And you can always pause it at any point, and when and you'll be able to use substance in the meantime. But when you start paying again, it'll just pick up right up where you left off.
Yep. It's a great. I think what algorithmic is doing is the model going forward. It's great. All right, let's get this out. Let's get this out of Modo and over into Unity and start messing around with how Unity is going to be interpreting all these textures and all these materials, okay? So as we went through last week, exporting objects from Modo is really, really easy, right? Simply selecting the item in the item list, right-clicking, and then choosing Export Selected Layer will give us the popover menu that we need to cleanly export all this information from our system. So I want to make sure that Just Layers is turned on. That way, when I export all this out, I ensure that just my geometry leaves the application. I'm not going to get my lights, my camera's going to stay in app, I just want the mesh item. And I think I'm a big fan of Collada, but I know Collada is actually, we're transitioning more into a world where FBX is kind of the only player, unfortunately. It makes me uncomfortable, but it is what it is. I can't control that. So let's call this Forge. That's not how you spell Unity. There we go. Put it right on my desktop. Save out that FBX. And now let's jump over into Unity and start making these connections. Did you guys go home and download Unity last week? Yes? Yes? Maybe? Quite possibly? Okay. Go download Unity. There's no reason to not to download it. It's fantastic. It really is. Let's call my Forge game here. It's going to be on my desktop, and I'm going to load in the cameras and the characters. That way I can walk around, and we'll create a project. I'll give it a couple seconds here to cook. Maybe more than a couple seconds to cook. All right. There's a new version. No, I don't want to do it. Okay. So now let's start importing in all these assets. Right-click, import new asset. Let's go find the model file that I just created. There it is. Let's import it in. Wonderful. Okay. Looks like the geometry is coming in quite nicely. Before I go any further, let's just look at, yes, great. I just want to make sure that all of these materials are intelligently named. Now you have some options in here, and this is going to really be dependent on your production pipeline, because we now have an asset that's got a lot of materials on it, okay? It can get confusing really quickly. Like let's say I have a material here called walls, okay? Well, what if I have like 3 different buildings inside of my scene, and each one of them has a material group called walls? Problem, right? Could be a problem with inside of your own production pipeline. Now, there are a lot of ways that we can kind of sidestep this if we want, and it really has everything to do with how you're managing your media, okay? I've seen people do this, and this is a complete legitimate way of working. They'll create like a folder, for example, and they'll call it assets, okay? Now, inside that assets folder, maybe they'll have a subfolder called Forge. Oops. Okay. And they'll put all these materials inside the Forge folder. They'll put the actual file itself inside the Forge folder, and then they'll put the Forge folder inside the assets folder. Okay. Okay. So here's everything that's being used to describe the Forge. Shoot, maybe we even do a couple other subfolders in here. We'll do materials, We'll do another one for textures. I really wish they would install smoke alarms in our bathrooms because I can smell someone smoking and it's driving me crazy. Absolutely driving me crazy. Actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to leave my model at the root of this just so it's easier to get to. So you're free to do this. This is fine. If you want to set up your scene, your asset directory like that, I think this is a great way of working, right? Because in every sense, what we've created here is one folder that contains all of the linked elements to this one model. That's not a bad way of working, right? We're making it very easy for us and for other people on our production team to kind of decode the role of each one of these assets and each one of these items inside of our asset directory. Does that make sense? You got it. You got it. That's fine too. Well, the prefab is going to come here in a minute. Okay, the prefab is going to come here in a minute. Okay, let's get it. Here's kind of a cool thing. Okay, now we talked about this last week that in every sense the project directory here, the project tab, is the assets folder inside of your game directory, right? So here's my game directory, my project directory. Here's the assets folder. Now check it out. This is the folder that I just created a minute ago called assets, right? Inside of it, there's the Forge asset. If I open it up, here's the FBX file. Here's all the materials. Don't touch those, by the way. Then here's a folder called textures, okay? This is actually really neat. I enjoy this very much. This folder here is live, meaning anything we place inside of it will automatically be incorporated into our system. So I can just grab all of my textures, for example, put them inside that textures folder. Then when we jump back over here into Unity, you can see that it's imported into the game, and they're going to be available for us inside that folder. Pretty cool, huh? There they all are. Awesome. Okay. Now we have to go through and start assigning each one of those textures back to the material itself. Okay. Let's just do it real quickly. And this is probably where having a naming convention will help. I'm just going to use my local kind of connection, my visual connection with these things. Roof bottom, albedo, it's that one. Walls is that one. Wood ends and is that one, and as is wood. Those are wood beams. I should have just called it wood beams. Cool. Now if we look at the actual object itself, things are not looking so hot. Okay, not looking hot at all. So let's figure out why we're getting what we're getting here. It has everything to do with some of the tiling factors that are associated with our object. Let's just figure out what's going on here. Now, import materials. So if you wanted to do by base texture name, you can do that. Let's reapply all that. I changed mine from models material. Yeah, I think we're good. Let's turn off our rig. We don't need that. We don't need, yep, that way. What we get in our hierarchy here is just the mesh item itself, okay? Now let's drag our Forge into our OpenGL viewport and see what we can see here. Okay, so, wow. So we have some massive problems, some mega problems inside of our system itself, right? Everything has been exported incorrectly. Yeah, that is a bummer. It wasn't an error, it was a warning message. And you often get that whenever you export everything. So let's drill down and see what's the problem here. Because there's really nothing we can do at the moment. There's nothing we can do at the moment to fix this problem inside of Unity. This is a Modo export problem. We could do this. This is the only thing that we kind of have power to do. We can take our material and drag it over certain areas. We could do that if we wanted to, and it seems to be working. Now this is going to work. There we go. So maybe it looks like just the materials got reassigned incorrectly. Then, of course, roof bottom. There we go. But all of its tiling factors need to be adjusted as well. Okay, so the rest of this actually kind of makes sense, and I was expecting to see the roof here kind of getting drawn incorrectly. Okay, oh, wood ends we got to do as well. If you notice, when I drag and drop these things in, it's still honoring the material tag. It's not applying that material just to a single part of my mesh, the polygon. It's applying it to every single polygon that shares that material tag, right? That's good for us. This is, as I mentioned earlier, we have a material-centric approach inside of Unity. If we go back over into Modo, though, and look at our model, yeah, we have some things that we need to change on the roof. Okay, let's look at the roof. Okay, now here's all my roof pieces, and specifically the area that's influenced by the roofing tile texture. If you remember, we didn't change, we didn't change the size of our UVs to get the tiling size of our texture, right? What did we change? Horizontal and vertical wrap, okay? That does not transfer over because that's part of the texture locator. The texture locator is not an exportable element inside of Modo, okay? However, that's not to say that we can't do and recreate the system easily over inside of Unity. We just need to go in and let's find, what is it? It is a roof, okay? Check it out, here we go. Tiling, horizontal and vertical wrap. Horizontal and vertical wrap, so I think I used 7. Yeah, I used 7 over in Modo, and you can see now we're getting the exact same reproduction over here in Unity. Let's go back into Modo and see about the roof bottom, because I did the exact same thing for that one as well. Seven as well, horizontal and vertical wrap. Done. Now we've recreated my model here in Unity to look exactly the way it looked like over inside of Modo. Pretty cool, huh? Pretty cool. I like it. Questions on this process of working with tiling textures? Okay, let's take a break. Been yakking for a couple hours. Let's take a break. Okay, so I went ahead and just created a very simple three-dimensional plane inside of Unity, and I scaled my little forge to match that first-person controller. Because I want to walk around my house and get a better understanding of how this asset's working inside the larger context of my game environment. I wanted to kind of reinforce the idea of this material-centric workflow one more time inside of Unity, right? Because I want to place a tiling texture on that ground plane. So you can create materials in Unity as well. We don't have to rely exclusively on what we generate over in Modo to help flesh out some of the properties of our environment here in Unity. So I'm in my project tab, I'll go create, and then there it is, material. Okay, and I'm just going to call this ground. All right, and let's load in an asset here. I went on to textures.com and found a really cool tiling texture for my ground. Okay, there it is right there. And let's just load it in. Wonderful. And check this out. This really is how easy as it is inside of Unity. You just drag and drop it. Okay, and you're on your way, which is pretty cool. Now, what's wrong with my ground texture at the moment? It's way too big. Those are like boulders, right? So we definitely want to go in and increase the tiling amount. Let's do like 5 by 5. Yeah, that's probably close. And now, at the very least, we have something to play with inside of our game world down here at the bottom. Yeah, it's still probably a little bit too big. But yeah, let's Command P to pause the game. I'll go back into ground. Let's put this to 7 by 7. Sorry, old habits die hard. I'm hitting return. I'm going to move my, there it is. This is the kind of the cool and the power of working inside of an environment where you get access to both the editor and the game world at the exact same time, is that I can make changes to my material and see how those changes look inside the editor. I also want to change the rotation of my directional light here ever so slightly. And let's use the global orientation just to make it easier. And I'm being a nerd, but that's just kind of my bag. I'm matching the shadows of my house to the texture just to make it look a little bit more real. Yeah, now life is good here, right? Life is good. But I have a pretty big sweeping problem with my model at the moment. No, the exact opposite, actually. I can't go inside, but I can go inside all of it, right? I can just walk right through the walls. So there's nothing inside the game that's physically stopping me from jumping through the walls. This is called collision. We need to generate some collision information to stop my game controller, my character, if you will, from walking into the walls. And it's really easy to do this. There's basically two ways that we can create collision information quickly inside of Unity. If we go back to the original file that we imported in, and FYI, I apologize, I forgot to mention this during the break. I went ahead and during the break and I re-exported the model from Modo using the Collada file type, and all of my materials and their corresponding connections came in just perfectly. Further evidence that FBX is often going to give you issues, right? Collada is fantastic, okay? All right, back to collision. Now, we can have the computer generate collision automatically for us. If we go back to the original asset, here it is, here's the model file. Check it out. Way over here, so I'm in the model import settings, we can have the computer generate colliders for us automatically. Now, what's going to happen here, let's just hit apply. If we go look at the original asset inside of hierarchy, oops, let's see. Is it on there? It may not be on there yet. Did I hit apply? Oops. Generate colliders. Yeah, I did hit apply. Let's play the game. It should have done it. Let's see if it does it. No, it hasn't done it yet. That's interesting. Did I break my prefab? I should not have. Yeah, so the mesh collider is on there. Let me just reinsert it back into the scene here. I'm going to delete that asset. I'll put the old one or the new one back in. And I need to make it a little bit bigger, so let me make it a little bit bigger. Now when I play my game, bonk, I'm not going to walk through the walls, okay? I now am generating collision information across every single polygon that's on the mesh, okay? let's look at specifically what the computer has done inside of Unity. And if we start to explore the asset, the hierarchy of the asset here, the collision information is going to be pretty easy to see. It's kind of grayed out at the moment, so let's look at the one that's in the hierarchy. Yeah, okay. We're looking at this component, okay? This is the component. Now, right now, if you look very carefully, since we checked on that generate colliders, it automatically added the mesh collider game component to this game object, right? Specifically, there's a channel down there called mesh, and it's targeting the rough mesh geometry. So in every sense, it's looking right there. It's looking at the geometry that's encapsulated in this little bundle here. Look at my geometry. There's a lot of geo in there, right? There's a lot of geometry. I'm creating collision information for every single polygon that's on this mesh object, okay? This is not the most optimized way to work. We only want to generate collision information for the polygons that we absolutely need to generate collision for, right? I don't need to generate or have the computer generate collision information for like the windows here. I don't need the computer to generate collision information for that. I don't need the computer to generate collision information for the insides of my mesh, because at the moment, this model, we can't go inside of the mesh, right? I only really need to generate collision information for the main exterior pieces, like the wall here, this guy, maybe even these beams, the rough approximation of the roof and the second story. I don't need everything.
So when you make it go so you can get inside the house, would you want to reapply the collision?
Well, we have to have an approach. We have to have a strategy on what we want to generate collision information for, because we don't want to generate it for everything, because that's going to bog down our scene. This is one of those game optimization things that will make the performance of your level much, much stronger. When we start working with very detailed environments, where there's trees and bushes and mountains and waterfalls and a half a dozen different level pieces, or half a dozen different buildings, other players inside of our environment, that's going to dominate a lot of our system resources. One area that we can save in is collision. So here's what we're going to do. Since all collision information from the mesh collider comes from a mesh layer or a mesh object inside of our scene, check this action out. We're actually going to return back over into Modo. And we're going to create a very, very rough outline, if you will, of our little forge. Okay, this is kind of neat. Let's just do it real fast. I'm going to duplicate this mesh item because this is the one that I've been working on. So let's duplicate it. And we're going to call this rough collision. Oops, that's not how you spell collision. Collision. Okay, now on this one, we're going to go through and strip out basically everything that we don't care about. I don't care about collision for the door, okay? I don't care about collision for all of these guys in here. I am going to do don't need that. Don't need all of these guys. I mean, there's so much that we can optimize here to very, very quickly get the collision that we're after. I'll leave a majority of this in here, because I don't want to go through and do this forever. Rough approximation, right? We only want to have the polygons on our collider mesh that we know are going to be influencing our scene. Is my gamer going to get to the top of the roof? Well, maybe. He might be able to jump up there. But he's certainly not going to be interfacing with all the geometry for the window frames. We don't need to generate collision information for that. Same with maybe that piece there. That piece there we don't need collision information on. Of course, all of these beams we don't need collision information on. Maybe it would be easier to select the geometry that we do want collision on, and then invert that selection, and then go from there. I don't need collision information for that. The roofs, chimney, that. I want collision for that, for these big posts down here. Let's see, I want all of this jazz. Don't care about that one. I do care about these. Don't care about the windows. Yeah, I think that's good enough for where we're going. And I'm going to invert my selection and delete everything else, okay? Because I just, oops, yeah, no, that's good. Now let's clean up the insides of these guys, because I don't want to generate collision information for the interiors, because we're not even going to go inside, right? So why are we going to have the computer processing and managing those polygons when we're not even really going to be in this area? It doesn't make sense. Now this is absolutely something you want to do at the end of your modeling stage. When everything is dialed and ready to go, we'll leave the window frames just in case the gamer jumps up there, okay? Oops. It's a great way to optimize your environment to only have the computer process the polygons we want it to process. Like, I have a roof in here that I don't need. A ceiling. The gamer is not even going to go in here, so why am I going to have... I just want that stuff to be there for the rendering. Same with the floor. Don't need those pieces. Yeah, rock and roll. Okay, that's it. That's it. Now, with that done, here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to export both of these items out at the exact same time. Like this. Have them both selected. Right-click, export selected layers. Of course, I'm going to use the collada file one more time. And we'll call this just Forge version 2. Just so we can compare and contrast them. Awesome. Okay, now let's jump back over into Unity and start messing around with this. Let's just get rid of this guy. Don't need him anymore. And I'll import in Forge version 2. Okay. Hey, awesome. All the materials were linked together for me, but check it out. Now I got some options down here. I got rough, and I got rough collision. So those two mesh items came in under the exact same document. I'm going to get rid of this guy. I don't need that part of the system. Of course, it's not going to let me, but that's okay. Because when I work with it here in a minute, I'm going to strip all that out. Let's make it bigger. Awesome. Okay, so in Forge version 2, I'm going to get rid of this thing. I don't need it. Okay, yep, break it. That way it's never, ever, ever going to be rendered. The collision object isn't going to be rendered. However, under the rough object itself, let's go ahead and add in a collider. Now, we could do it at the import stage like we did earlier. We can generate colliders, turn that on, and hit apply. That's fine. That's going to work. But let me show you the alternative. I can go back up here to my document. I'm going to add a component. It's going to be a physics component. And this is where we find the actual mesh collider itself. Now, I probably should be doing this on this object instead of the parent. Physics, and then we'll add the mesh collider. Now, right now, check it out. Right now, it's trying to use this element, or excuse me, it is trying to use this mesh object to generate the collision. We don't want that. We want this one, right? Look at what object is loaded in to the system here, okay? We can change them by dragging and dropping them, okay? You can also hit the little target and choose which mesh items we're generating the collision, okay? Now, if we were to select this thing, check it out. I'm not generating collision for a lot of things. The green outlines are only the polygons that we're generating collision on, okay? Which is perfect, 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 perfect. I'm not asking the computer to generate collision on some of the smaller detailed pieces that I fundamentally don't need it to. We've now optimized our collision system to give us a little bit more performance inside the game. And of course, the result that we get is something identical. Bloop. I'm not going to be able to walk through the walls, okay? But we get a very, very similar result, okay? If not identical to what we had before, but in a much more optimized fashion, excuse me. Oftentimes, when we're working with game art assets, geometrically, they're going to be very, very dense and include a tremendous amount of detail. but we don't necessarily want or need or can afford collision for every single polygon, right? Maybe only just a few. I know I can optimize my collision system even more by putting in rough bounding boxes for some of those detail pieces. Like the chimney, for example, it doesn't need to have collision information for all that jazz. The bottom itself, so you could even go back. Let's look at our collision mesh. I'm going to turn off all my materials so I can see what I'm doing. So here's the collision geo. Well, you know, down here at the bottom, maybe I don't need collision information for each window. I can just fill that in. Fill in all the windows, basically. And now I can get rid of all these loops because they're not needed. And simplify the system down pretty dramatically. Okay, now it's just a box. I'd probably do the same thing. Well, actually, I know I do the exact same thing for the top as well. You can simplify these shapes down into their least common denominator, if you will. It's most simple approximation to further optimize the collision information that you're sending into the game engine. Does that kind of make sense? We're in control, and we need to be in control. This is a great area for us to optimize our game to get the best performance, because we're going to be throwing a lot of geometry, a lot of textures, and then when we start infusing the interactive components in our game, memory is actually going to be something that we need to manage. How much information our computer can store at any given time to give us the result that we're after. Yeah? Cool? Thumbs up for rock and roll? Okay. Great. Okay, let's go back to D2L real fast and check out precisely what I'm going to be asking you guys to accomplish this week. Oops. Here, I'm not going to live stream. I'm not going to live stream all of my login. All right, so if we go back into the content section, oh, this is GCOM 402. I want a GCOM 424. Here we go. All right, so if we go to the content section this week, our sole focus is to wrap up our blacksmith shop. That is our singular focus. I know that many of you guys still have some work that you need to do geometrically on your blacksmith shop. UV mapping all these little parts and pieces is going to take some time, as will the creation and application of all of your textures for the model itself. Let's look at some of the expectations for your project this week. Okay, so all the geometry should be done. All the UV maps should be done. And then diffuse and bump maps for everything. Okay. Now, we haven't talked about how to take a tiling texture and transform it into a bump map. So, well, actually, I think we did. If you flip your texture to a grayscale, and let me show you what that process looks like. Okay. We talked about this a couple weeks ago, but let's just revisit it again one more time just so we're all fluent in the process. Okay. So here is the wood roof texture. Let's do this. I'm going to flip it into a grayscale by adding, inside of Photoshop, an adjustment layer. You can find it in the yin and the yang symbol, amongst other places. And if we go hue saturation, we actually get a tremendous amount of control over the color values of our objects, over the saturation values. If we turn the saturation values all the way down, you can see that the color is removed from the image. We've made a black and white image, which is exactly what we want, right? Now, we have one more thing that we probably should do, and that's to do a levels as well. Okay, and we can continue refining how our bump map is going to look, okay? Remember the big picture ideas behind these bump maps, okay? The white pixels are going to create peaks. The black pixels are going to create valleys. Any pixels that's that medium gray right there in the middle at 50% is not going to have an effect on our actual bump itself, okay? So keep that in mind as you begin to work and adjust these values. We're going to want to have some that are kind of 50% gray. So it's okay if things are kind of muddy a little bit. I guess that's probably a good way of putting it. Takes some massaging. I actually had a lot of pixels that were already 50% gray. Yeah. Let's just roll. That's a little too contrasty. Let's just roll with something like that. So that's a good bump map. Let's just step in the right direction. I'll do save as. I'll append the file name with BMP for bump. And I'll save it as a JPEG or a PNG. Let's do PNG. Put it on my desktop. And now, if we jump over into Unity, check it out. Let's load in that texture real fast, that bump map that I just created. It will do the conversion for you. Import, there we go. Now what we need to do over here, see the texture type changes to normal map, okay? Hit apply, you can see that it does it. Let's see what kind of quality that looks like, because we can always re-import it in. Let's return and find the material that's responsible for the wood. And now I'm going to drag and drop my bump map into my normal map image well. Yeah, there it is. So it's a little too contrasty, or what the computer did when it automatically converted it. Did a little too strong. I think it is also flipped. So let's do this. Let's turn the bumpiness value down significantly. There we go. You can see that it updates in the computer too. That's better. That's a little bit more like it, because now my specular highlight's going to be broken up. You can see it, yeah, you can see it right in here. The filtering, you can play around with this a little bit. Start to blur it out. It won't be as contrasty in its conversion, but this is a good process to very quickly creating bump maps and normal maps inside the computer itself. Is it perfect? No, it's absolutely not perfect. Are there better ways of doing it? Yeah, there are better systems and tools that will give us really super accurate bump maps from existing textures. But this is a start, and this is a step in the right direction. Okay, step in the right direction. Questions on that process? It's really super easy. Okay, so I want you to do diffuse and bump maps for everything inside of your scene. It's going to go a long, long way to make your objects feel a little bit more lifelike. Okay. So there's two things that you'll need to generate at the conclusion of this process. Okay. Of course, you're going to be generating a portfolio render. Okay. And then you're going to be giving in and you're submitting your Luxology project file. This is going to be the last week of submitting just your Luxology project file. Okay. Starting next week, we're going to start talking about how to actually build a small game, and then you're going to be handing in an application basically every single week, starting forward. Okay, starting next week, you're going to be giving me a game build, as they say, and it's awesome because you'll be able to just like double click on the icon, just like any other app. It'll launch like a game. You'll be able to play the game. It'll be a whole lot of fun.
And we have to do this in Unity?
Yes, in Unity.
All right.
Yep. Yeah, it's going to be pretty great. Okay, so this is the last week of submitting exclusively just your Moto project file and a portfolio render. Everything going forward is going to be game-specific content. Okay? Questions? All right, I'm going to give you guys the remainder of class time today to finish working on this project. I know that you guys have a lot of work in front of you, so it's important that you get those cycles today. So our lab time today is going to be spent finishing up the assignment and striving to create a whole series of textures that accurately and beautifully describes our work.